Well, if I was about 50 years younger, I think I probably would.
Well, it's absolutely clear what I would do. I like the avians, but very quickly I would determine that they were not more advanced than the human species. The octospiders would fascinate me. I would see the colors streaming around their heads. I would want to speak to them in their language. I would want to understand where they came from, how they evolved, what their past history was, what their goals were, what their values were. And all of that would be where I would go. So if I were to be on board, the commander of the crew would have a hard time keeping me from finding out what that was all about.
Well, there's so much to look for. You really aren't looking, you're just discovering new wonders. You're not looking for anything specific because everywhere there's something new that you've never even thought of. I'm sure we'll be going back to the moon with much better and safer and more economical spacecraft early in the next century. But the real action is going to be on Mars, maybe 2020 or there onwards. As space travel becomes easier and safer and cheaper, we will inevitably go out to the planets. But we have to wait for improvements in technology. And when they come along, whether the will is there or not, we'll go. But we've just quite recently had another very good reason for going into space. The whole world watched when Jupiter was clobbered by Shoemaker-Levy. Now we know this happened in the past. It's happened many times in the history of our Earth. 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs were probably made extinct, or they may be on the way out anyway, but that impact 65 million years ago finished off the dinosaurs. And as my friend Larry Niven once said, the reason why the dinosaurs became extinct was because they didn't have a space program. Well, I'm afraid it's a little too late now. I don't even like going in airplanes anymore, I'm afraid. But I guess it's going to take a long time to get to Mars. 6 or 8 months on the minimum orbit, isn't it?
Right.
So no, I'm afraid I couldn't face that sort of thing. But if a flying saucer landed and said, "I'll take you to Alpha Centauri," that's another thing. But I think most people agree with me in saying it seems incredible that in this gigantic universe, we are the only life form or the only intelligence. I would bet almost anything that there's lots of intelligence out there, and one day we may contact it or it may contact us. I think it's quite possible that there may have been visitors here on Earth in the remote past. Unfortunately, nonsensical books and fraudulent books by people I won't mention because the lawyers might be on me, have made it difficult for serious scientists and researchers to look into this. Let me make one thing perfectly clear. I don't believe there's been any contact with extraterrestrials in the last few hundred years. We have to go back much further than that. But it may be tomorrow. I'm quite prepared to think I think that's perfectly possible. But it's more likely to be in 10, 100 years. Recently I had the privilege of talking to one Mr. Turner and one Mr. Murdoch, not simultaneously, but I raised this point. I mentioned that our television programs now occupy a sphere maybe 100 light years across, and many civilizations may therefore know about us, about our atrocities, our wars, our crimes, real, fictional, and real, which it might be very difficult for an alien intelligence to distinguish. I deduce from that there aren't any higher civilizations within, say, 50 light years of Earth, because if there were, the cops would be here already with their sirens screaming right across the radio spectrum. Great unknown question is, are we closer to apes or angels in the hierarchy of the universe? Indeed, are there any angels or their equivalent out there in space? I hope that I'll see an answer to this question in my lifetime, though it may take who nobody knows. They may arrive, or we may discover their existence tomorrow. It may take 1,000 years. Although I'm often called the father of satellite communications, I prefer to be called the godfather. The real fathers are the engineers who put their careers online and made it all happen. The communications revolution, of which satellites were only one part, has changed human society out of all recognition. Perhaps the most important thing it's done is create an era of transparency. Although there are still some exceptions, it's no longer possible to hide what is going on anywhere. We're all living in glass houses, and this, I think, is a very good thing. It began during the closing months of the war, when we space cadets of the British Interplanetary Society, and a society which was formed in 1933 to try to go to the moon, it had been in suspended animation during the war, and we were looking around for ways in which rockets might be useful instead of being employed to blow people up. And that's when it occurred to me that we could use rockets to launch satellites into orbits which would broadcast television or anything else to the Earth. And I wrote this up in a paper, a 4 or 5 page paper, and it was published, and that's where it all started. Although this is very speculative, we may be on the verge of tapping a new energy source incomparably greater than anything we've had available before. In fact, it makes atomic energy, nuclear energy, look like nothing. This is so-called zero-point energy, or quantum fluctuations. Space itself, even what we consider empty space, the vacuum of space, is actually a seething mass of energy. The Nobel laureate Richard Feynman once put it very dramatically. He said the energy in a cubic meter of vacuum is enough to boil all the oceans of the Earth. Now, that seems an utterly fantastic statement, but we have in fact detected this energy. It was done in the Philips laboratories by Dr. Casimers a few decades ago. He was able to detect this gigantic energy source in a simple experiment. If we can tap this and use it to run our machines or whatever, or our spacecraft, this would open up the universe, and it would give us an almost infinite source of energy. And that would be the end of the fossil fuel age, the end of uranium, and the nuclear age. It would solve our pollution problems, the carbon dioxide buildup. It would change our world out of all recognition, more than anything, perhaps, since the discovery of fire. One of the reasons why I'm interested in this infinite energy, the phrase cold fusion is rather passé, and it may not be fusion at all, is because if this is for real, and I'm now 95% convinced that it is, this will open up the universe, because it would give us essentially weightless power. The problem with rockets, our only means of propulsion in space, is we need gigantic quantities of fuel to carry a tiny payload. But if this infinite energy works, and if, as is possible, it might even provide a method of propulsion, then the universe is going to open up just as the sailing ship opened up the world. You can't beat the laws of thermodynamics. Everything degrades to heat. Where's the heat going to go? Venus, here we come. 500 degrees in the shade. Well, I'm sure there will be a technological solution to that. "2001 was written and appeared at a unique moment in human history. It was released before the first men had landed on the moon, in fact, before the first flight around the moon. And of course, we had to guess what things would be like there. On the whole, we did pretty well, although we had much too jagged lunar landscapes. You know, that was a tradition. And of course, now it's obvious that the moon is pretty well sandblasted, so it's smoother. And it's interesting to notice the things that we got right and the things we got wrong. Who would have dreamed that the Bell system and Pan Am would be no longer with us? But Hilton is still around. Now, the other thing we had to guess was what it would be like on the moons of Jupiter, which were just points of light in the most powerful telescope then. And it wasn't, of course, until the Voyager missions went there that we got close-ups of these fantastic places. And we didn't do too badly even there, I think.
No, you did fairly well. No one could have predicted
Right.
Io. I mean,
No one.
that was just staggering.
After this lapse of time, I can no longer say what ideas were mine and what ideas were standard, with a few exceptions. Some of the basic ideas came from stories of mine, particularly The Sentinel, which is a very short story about the discovery of a fire alarm, if you like, on the moon, set there by some alien race to alert the universe when we've reached the moon. And this is an idea which has been taken quite seriously, and it has been suggested there may be such alarms, perhaps not on the moon, but in the asteroid belt, which we may trigger when we get there. Well, that was my idea. But then we embroidered so many concepts, and, you know, like a table tennis game, we were batting ideas back and forth, and 90% of them were probably bad, and of the 10% that survived, probably half of Stanley's and half mine. When 2001 was released, early in '68, and it's already had its 25th anniversary, which I can't believe. At first, everyone thought it was a disaster. I can remember at the Washington premiere, one of the MGM executives saying, well, that's the end of Stanley Kubrick. And in fact, the first reviews were lukewarm or even critical. And then, of course, the critics went back and saw it again and changed their minds. But there was a slow groundswell. It took a couple of weeks before the message got around, and we realized, you know, probably within a month, that we did have something exceptional on our hands. This is what happens when I switch off my computer.
My mind is going.